Brown says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a priest! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell killer!
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Tip Sheet Podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as 4020, joining me for another relatively, well, I'll say cruisy week in Parradise, as well as the greater NRL as my good mate Sixties. Just the gruesome twosome reporting the NRL and Parramatta happenings this week, mate. So with Clint away on holidays, I'll check in on how you're doing.
Well, mate, did the good deed of the week in rescuing a little baby pink and grey galah that looked like it was injured. So it was the old phone wires, take the bird to a vet. So having the feel goods for what I've done myself with that one. But apart from that, hasn't it been a full-on week with the news breaking by Chris Barrett about Roy Spagnolo's link to the Make Parramatta Again group and the EGM that they've triggered at Parramatta Leagues Club. And we'll talk about that in some detail, but of course, there's a lot of news around with Parramatta. Outside of that, on the football front, we'll be talking about some signings that are being rumoured and at least one that's confirmed. And, mate, apart from that, has the weather made up its mind? Is it really going to start warming up now?
We had some legit winter days, didn't we, recently? And had to get the old trackies out and stay warm. But, yeah, we've got a bit of bipolar weather going on, which is fairly classic Sydney at this time of year. But, yeah, maybe it might just be summer soon. Maybe.
Oh, I tell you, I had gave myself a little bit of a treat the other day. Took my mother down to Vikings at Dundas, and they've got this special on now where you get a lobster mornay for $19.90, and that's obviously like a half lobster mornay there, but $19.90, can't complain about that. But then when my particular member discounts came off, it came down to $11.90 for myself and my mother to each get a lobster mornay. Mate, I don't think you can get better value than that. So they've got that this month there at Vikings down at Dundas. So maybe people get down there for that. It's only on certain days. I think it's Monday to Wednesday that it's available. But there were certainly people there taking advantage of that on the day that we were there. So I recommend that. And while we're in the shout-outs, shout out to our sponsor, Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. Their continued support of the Cumberland Throw, which we know will go into next year, which, of course, is our 10-year anniversary coming up. And that's big news on the TCT front. So, John, I think we're just about ready to get into the podcast.
News team, assemble!
John, let's lead off with what's been happening around the Make Parramatta Again group and the investigation that was done by journalist Chris Barrett, published in the Sydney Morning Herald earlier this week, and it revealed Roy Spagnolo's support for this MPMA group. They've presented a petition to the club with a number of signatures that's called for an EGM to vote out 4 of the incumbent Parramatta Leagues Club directors. It wasn't common knowledge before then that Roy Spagnolo had lent his support to this group. As part of that support, he'd been emailing friends and associates, and there was about 80 people apparently that he emailed, and that included Joe Tribodi, that former New South Wales government politician who was found guilty of corruption by ICAC. Liba Zabara, who the NRL had found connected to undisclosed player payments back in 2016. And Eddie Obi Jr., the son of Eddie Obi, the jailed former Labor power broker, who it is alleged that Eels players received off-the-books payments before the club was stripped of those 12 competition points. So there's a little bit of a link there with a couple of those fellows that Roy contacted for support. They've got those links back to the salary cap days. Certainly it's a path that most supporters would not want the Eels to go back down again. But, of course, one of the things that they're looking to do in removing those 4 current directors is to get control of the Parramatta Leagues Club Board and therefore they feel institute the changes to get control of the Parramatta Eels Football Board. Now, we need to point out to anyone that's listening that's not fully aware of this, these are 2 separate boards with their own constitutions. Back when Max Donnelly was appointed as the administrator of the Leagues Club, the New South Wales government appointed him as the administrator. The Eels Leagues Club Board and Football Board were one in the same. And the instability around the Leagues Club Board led to instability around the Football Board because they were one in the same. And as an example of that instability, over the period between 2009 and 2016, there were 5 different CEOs of the club, 5 different first-grade coaches, and wait for this, 25 different board directors. That's a phenomenal turnover of board members in such a short period of time. Now, bear in mind, those people were directing the activities of both the Leagues Club and the football operation. One of Max Donnelly's first priorities was to set up an independent football board so that they would not be impacted by the voting changes, what would occur in any volatility around the Parramatta Leagues Club elections. And you wouldn't get that level of instability. It was important to get that stability, but not just stability, but actual, qualifications and expertise in running a business. So he set about establishing that independent board. Now, because the Parramatta Leagues Club is the owners of the football club, they were to always have 2 representatives on the 7-person board. So, without too much of a history lesson, then after that step, the next thing was for Max Donnelly to get constitutional change for the Leagues Club so that you would get better governance, and that involved, first of all, getting a highly qualified board to start off with, which he selected, and then, as it's turned out after that, with triennial elections, which means a couple of directors standing every year for re-election on the Leagues Club board, members have voted in that original board. And what we've had then has been stability in the Leagues Club, stability in the football club. We've seen a period of time where, take out this last season, which had its difficulties, but you had periods of time then where the Eels were in the finals football, qualified for the grand final, And it's fair to say that the football operation, despite the headaches of this year, is in a far different situation to what it was in the lead up to 2016. So here we are in this present day. We've had a tough 2024 season. We've got a group that thinks that they are able to come in and take control of the football club by taking control of the leagues club without fully understanding how the constitutions work and about what needs to happen for this change to occur. They are suggesting that we remove, that 4 directors are removed without anyone standing as an alternative, and that's the important thing. There are no nominees. This isn't a vote for who should be the directors of the club. This is a vote to get out 4 directors who are on a board which is going absolutely great guns with Parramatta Leagues Club. And let's make that very, very clear. The Leagues Clubs, I don't think it's ever been in a better position. You've got a lot of improvements to facilities. You've got improvements to the facilities, not just at Para Leagues, but at Vikings. You've got the acquisition and improvement to facilities at the Dural Club. And you've got some plans that are about to be announced for development in the Parramatta Leagues Club precinct itself. I believe it's really big plans. So you're trying to remove directors from a successful Leagues Club board with the goal to get control of the football board. And you've got links to people who were involved in the past, a past that no supporter is happy about. So that's where things stand. This is what was brought to light by Chris Barrett in his article. And the thing that I've added in there was as a concerned member, when this notice of EGM was first revealed, I emailed the club. I wanted to find out, well, what's the cost of this EGM? Because I figured it's got to be significant. And especially as it's right in the shadows of the AGM that occurs early next year. We're having an EGM at the end of 2024 when there's an AGM at the start of 2025. Tell me how that makes sense, right, from a cost perspective. And the reply that I got was that it's around the $300,000 mark. And I know there are people who are going, well, that can't be right. Well, yeah, it is, because there's 65,000 Parramatta Leagues Club members who by law must all receive a mailed package, right? Not one sheet of paper, but all the voting papers associated with this election. So it's mailed to them. So you've got the cost of printing, you've got the cost of mailing. Now, when you work it out, that sort of cost comes to $4.60 per member. That's not extraordinary in terms of the cost of mail and printing and those sorts of things. People might think, oh, you get maybe a couple hundred people turn up at a meeting at the club and they'll run off 200 photocopied sheets about the voting and hand it out to the people. That's not how it works. Every one of the 65,000 members has to be informed and given the right to vote. And if you get 100 or 200 people that turn up at the meetings, well and good. But it's not 100 or 200 people that are voting and making the decision. It's everyone has to have the right and be informed of that. That's law. It costs money to do that. And then you've got all the electronic voting that's allowed, and you have to engage an organisation like Computershare to do all of the voting counts. All right. And then we're not even talking about the expense of the legal costs when the resolutions were put forward for the EGM. That involves lawyers going over that and making sure that it complies with all standards. You've got the staff that's going over that. You've got all the organisation time. The real cost will go well past $300,000. But if there's any member who has a concern that I'm not giving you accurate figures, you're more than entitled, as I did, as a member to contact the club and get the details. So anyway, that's where we're at. Our message to you is, because this is not an election as such, we will give you where we stand, because we're not telling you to vote for one candidate against another. We're going to be voting on the resolutions, and we're going to be voting against the resolutions, because this is one of the worst things that I've seen put forward for the club, in my opinion, at a time where the club just doesn't need any threat of instability. So we need the club to be moving forward, not moving towards the past. And that's why, in my opinion, people should be voting against the resolutions. John, have you got anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, look, unfortunately, time has a way of looping back on itself, and in this case, I'd like to try and break the cycle. So, yeah, I think vote against resolutions. The important thing for members to understand is the separate entities of the PLC and the PNRL. And the PLC board has barely put a foot wrong. They've got the club growing nicely. We've had a number of acquisitions and growth, including the Dural Club and beyond. Vikings is now turned around massively under their watch as well. So there is no reason to oust that part of the Parramatta identity purely because the NRL team had a bad year, which is what this feels a lot like they're playing on, is that the NRL team had a bad year. Let's see this as an opportunity. So, like you said, this is not an election. We have no obligation to be neutral. We are voting against this.
Yeah, and I guess that reminder is that people need to make sure that they vote. Now, you can go to the Leagues Club website. You can hit their drop-down menu. You will see that the information is there. When you hit the drop-down menu for the EGM, you can go in there. You can fully read the what will be happening at the EGM. You can read the statements of the incumbent directors who the resolutions are trying to remove, and there are the 4 resolutions for the 4 directors. So the directors have their statements about themselves and why you should vote against the resolution. The 5th resolution is that the meeting would then vote on how they're to be replaced, but it basically says that it can be at an election at a further date, at a future date. But again, it's like, well, who are you voting for, right? You've just got they're saying, oh, well, let's just get rid of these 4 people, and then that others are going to step forward. So in the Chris Barrett article, Roy Spagnolo was asked, would you intend standing for the board? And he said he was undecided about that. Roy stood at the start of this year in February he nominated for a place on the board. He took the club to court for the right to stand, the right to nominate for a place on the board. He finished 3rd in that election for a 2-man board. Now think about that. He finished 3rd in the election for 2 spots on the board, not a 2-man board, 2 spots on the board. If there were suddenly 4 spots available, do you think he would or would not nominate for a position on the board? And I'll just leave it at that. And John, let's leave it there and get into talking about some football now.
Yeah.
So, on the football front, let's talk about last weekend, because there were some Parramatta players in action in Papua New Guinea. And first of all, in the schoolboys game, there were 4 Parramatta players, Parramatta Pathways players in action. We had Ryder Talangi, we had Lockie Kanikis, we had Lincoln Fletcher and Tyson Sangalang. Lockie was the starting dummy half. The other 3 players came off the interchange. And as we know, it was a draw between the Australian schoolboys and the PNG schoolboys. First of all, in that, I think, John, we have to do a shout out to our great mate Joey Grimer, who was the coach of the PNG team and has been reshaping all the pathways up there in Papua New Guinea. What a tremendous job he's doing up there. I mean, to have a situation where a PNG schoolboys team is, well, basically in a position to win, which they were for the second, that final second half of that game, or and going into that final quarter with quite a decent lead. The Australian team were able to run them down and get a draw, but I mean, we're talking about Australian schoolboys.
Yeah, it was a hell of an effort from the PNG side, and Joey's been there for a short time, but has clearly got the pathway system kicked into overdrive ahead of what I believe they're tipping to be a 2028 debut for a PNG franchise. So you need those, the bloodlines of pathways in place in order to feed that eventual NRL franchise, and obviously going to be able to supplement the team with NRL recruitment. But by the same token, you're going to need a strong base inside PNG to really build that squad up, and it looks like it's starting to get there. And there's still plenty of work to do, obviously, but the fact that they've taken a strong lead over the Australian team and then held them to a draw at the end, and Australia could have, should have won if the Canaro centre kicks that goal, which was pretty much a throw over, let's be brutally honest. But the fact that they were even in a position where they were leading in the dying minutes of a game is such a huge moment for PNG, and it bodes really well for what they've got going under Joey's tutelage. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's what caught me, John, was the athleticism of the PNG players. I think he's probably taking that to another level there, because they just don't have or haven't had the facilities or the structures there. As you might remember, John, when Joey first took up the position there, he sent us a few videos and photos of the players, young players that were turning out for trials, for squads, and the fields that they were doing the trials at. And, there were players that were barefoot, and it's just, you cannot compare the facilities that they have there to the facilities that exist in Australia for sport. Like they've got, that's probably be one of the challenges that they will have in PNG, is making sure that the infrastructure exists for a population that's absolutely mad about football. And that was the other thing that came through from the videos and the photos that we saw, was this the passion and love for rugby league. And when we got to speak to Joey on a return trip here, and he was really talking about that. And I know we recorded with him, but also in our candid conversations with him, and I'm sure he doesn't mind me saying this, he was talking about how almost overwhelming it is, the love that they have for the game, and just the respect that exists for people connected with professional rugby league. Literally, I guess it's been documented about how the NRL players are almost treated like gods when they go up there. Well, it does extend to people who are in positions like Joey, because, this is an Australian rugby league coach who's over there, and people in those sorts of positions are revered, and it's I guess it's a bit of a mind-blowing experience when people first go up there, that this is what it's like. But so the work that he's done, because these players haven't had the training or the facilities or the equipment that Australian players have at the most basic grassroots levels in Australia. So it's a remarkable job that he's done. Now, I do want to mention, of course, those 4 players, because I think we can be proud that in that squad there, that there were 4 Parramatta Pathways players who were involved in that. Lincoln Fletcher scored one of the tries in the Australian schoolboys comeback. So he was instrumental in that. When he came on, he was playing in the fullback position. Now Lincoln plays as a halfback in the Parramatta's this year in Parramatta's Harold Matt's team. So I would imagine that halfback position will be the position that he'll focus on going forward. But I think he did have a bit of a background as a fullback, and so he played fullback in that match. Of course, Ryder is the talented younger brother of Blaze Talangi and is a middle forward. So he's a different build to Blaze, but he's certainly making his way through the system. And of course, I mentioned Lockie Kanikis as the dummy half there, and he probably had his best season for Parramatta his last 2 seasons have actually been very good. He did have slightly interrupted injury year this year, but he'd be looking to kick on in the Jersey Flegg squad in the coming year. And Tyson Sangalang also was his first year in SG ball this year, so he also can be proud. And those boys also did very well at the Schoolboys Cup level as well. So shout out to all of those fellas for their efforts, not only this year with Parramatta Pathways, but also in making the representative teams that they have this year at the schoolboy level, and for their respective, whether it was combined Catholic colleges or the CHS teams, and then going to Australian schoolboys level. John, I just wanted, before we talk about the Prime Minister's games, I wanted to talk about the big news coming out of Parramatta Juniors, seeing as though we're talking about juniors, and that's the Parramatta Junior Rugby League withdrawing from the Central West Conference that they'd formed in the upper years of Junior Rugby League as a joint venture with Canterbury Bankstown. So this was from the 2022 season onwards that it had been a combination of the Parramatta junior teams and the Canterbury junior teams to provide greater depth in those older age competitions. But now, due to growth in the Parramatta Junior Rugby League, due to the success of the Parramatta Junior Rugby League clubs in their Battle of the West competition with Penrith, the decision has been made to focus on the Parramatta catchment area alone and to have a dedicated Parramatta Junior Rugby League again without having a joint competition with the Canterbury Bankstown club. So that's big news. We'll try to bring more news on that as it comes out about what shape it's going to take next year. We'll get some more information on that, present it to you. But just wanted to mention that because it has been big breaking news in the last week or so out of Parramatta. John, the PM games. We had some players in the women's game, so we'll talk about that first. Abby Church and our favourite player.
The rookie of the year that wasn't to be.
Yes.
What a stupid rule. I still can't get over that. Like, seriously, it makes sense if you're bringing over an entrenched rugby 7 star that's 28 years old. But if you're under 21 and you're making the jump to rugby league, why are you being judged unfairly? I don't know. Anyway, the good
But
news
Rory
is
Owen-
the good news
Rory
is
Owen-
that she's as good at rep football as she is at Parramatta football. So she had a whale of a game alongside Abby Church. I thought they were both awesome. The golf and talent was pretty huge between the two sides there, and I know that it wasn't a full strength side for either squad, but the Australian backups, it's a formidable team in its own right, isn't it? 60s.
Oh yeah, I mean, you're talking about players in that PM's 13 team that could arguably, and in the case of Abby Church, she is in the Australian team anyway, but you had players there who have been stars for their NRLW team this season, and they're up against what was predominantly local PNG players. And, the women's game is really in an embryonic stage up in PNG. We saw a tenacious effort from their schoolgirls team, but they weren't able to go with the Australian schoolgirls team as well. But they've got a little bit further to go than what the male pathways do have, but it's promising. It's promising there. So as you said, mate, Rory, just as outstanding as she was for the Parramatta team. You saw the tries that were scored. It was, and Abby as well looked every bit that professional player out there, and it's good to see that she's getting the recognition that she deserves too, because she's arguably been one of Parramatta's most consistent performers since she's been with the club. So shout out to them. Now, what do you think about the men's PM's game, mate?
Yeah, the score eventually got into the right columns for Australia, but the Kumals got out to a fiery start and really had the Aussies knocked onto their heels a bit, didn't they? We saw a dummy half try and also the right edge getting exposed a bit with a backline shift for the Kumals. And I thought it was a really, I mean, it's something that we say most years. It was a very spirited showing from the PNG squad. But the Aussies obviously had enough talent to claw their way back into it and then get to a pretty comfortable lead at the end. But I don't think the PNG team were embarrassed by any stretch.
No, and you know what? I'll tell you what I was seeing something of, and I saw it in the schoolboys game as well, was the players. I mean, for a start, they've always taken it to the Australian teams, but I don't know if I'd say that they've got a cockiness about them, but it seems like they've got a self-belief.
Yeah,
and that they believe they have that right to be out there as well, and that they're not necessarily seeing the Australian players as godlike, on the football field. How the supporters see it might be different, but when they're out there, they were taking it to them, and I don't know whether there was any verbaling that was going on, but it wouldn't have surprised me if they had to be some mouthing off or what have you. They just, as I said, they looked like they had that cockiness about them that I don't know that I've seen before. As I said, that aggression's always been there, but just the way that they were celebrating the tries and really competing and I thought in a different way this year. So and again, because they were what, mostly the players that were in the QRL team.
Yeah, this wasn't like the NRL level players. This was a legitimate development team. So
yeah,
really, really positive things. The play that flashed a little bit for me was the one that came off the interchange. I think it was Dudley DeToy who sparked that incredible try that they had near the end, where he made a big breakdown their left edge and then put the chip kick ahead.
Yes.
But I thought that, the effort levels were fantastic. Certainly the PNG team should not be embarrassed about the scoreboard there. On the Australian side, they did a lot. It looked like the normal substitution rules weren't in place because the extended roster got runs here. Tyron Wishart, who was a reserve with the number 8 in his back, and KO Weeks of the 20, all played alongside the rest of the bench. So we saw a lot of reshuffling and different configurations. I think Sean Russell, the Parramatta's rep in this game, I thought it was really solid, but I think he also missed like the final 20 minutes when they did the backline reshuffle. So he certainly had a solid game. And then the player that probably didn't have a solid game was poor Fletcher Sharp. I thought he had a Barry Crocker, mate. He couldn't catch a high ball, was dropping them everywhere, struggled for impact in this one, and just the hot, swelling conditions there certainly got to him.
And I also wonder if, you know, the opportunity to, inverted commas, star in a game might have overtaken his thoughts a bit.
Yeah, it was like his first big rep game, wasn't it, in terms of getting to senior rep football. So, yeah, you want to go out there, you want to impress, you want to dominate, because you got, I mean, the number one, it's a jersey that bears a lot of responsibility these days. You know, you're one of the core playmakers, one of the most important players in the team, so you can definitely see that getting to him. But, yeah, beyond that, I mean, KO Weeks came off the interchange. I thought he had a great game. It's the sort of game we expect a player like KO, who is dynamic and got that electric turn of pace, to shine, and he did exactly that. And then across the park, a lot of solid performances. The back rowers, Fermor and Lucas, were both good. Who else stood out? I mean, you saw Brooks and the West Tigers boy, Lachlan Galvin, scheming and like, you know, trying to play a ball like maybe to the point of overplaying at times, but they both were good. Yeah. If anything, I thought that the right edge, which was Garrick and I believe, was that Camperera? I thought they were a little brittle in defence because the Kumul scored down that way a couple of times.
Yes,
and,
I agree there. Look, with regard to Fletcher Sharp, he can play.
People,
It was a shocker.
People poke fun at him for the bad game because that's what happens. It was a bad game, but there's no doubt he's a kid that can play some football.
Yeah, and look, Sean Russell, solid game, great setup for one of the tries there where he engaged the defence and then got that really crafty pass away.
He got it the way to Camperera, so it must have been Savage and Garrick on the other side, I believe. So
yeah.
And they were defensively very brittle.
Yes. That try where I think Garrick was literally over the try line when he was making the tackle in defence. So he just looked off. They looked off on that side, not both in terms of their positioning and as well as their technique. It just, I don't know. They don't look that brittle in NRL, so I don't know whether it's a combination and the, you know, talking to the player next year, that side of it. But yes, that was probably one of the disappointing aspects of the Australian PM's team. But in reality, they still did it relatively easy. But yeah, it was literally like a development team for that Papua New Guinea side. John, moving on from the PM's games last week, a couple of rumours around with Parramatta that we want to touch on. First of all, there's the rumoured signing that was reported on SEN today of Joash Papali'i from the Bulldogs. Now, this has been floating around for some time. We've talked about this being a potential signing for the Eels. When you get reporters starting to say, look, this is done, you start to sit up and go, you know what, this might have just about come through. So that was an interesting one. He's a good player, John.
Yeah, we've seen him star in the New South Wales Cup recently. He's still a young lad, primarily a fullback, but we spoke about on the podcast. He's got the flexibility to play a few positions. He's played in the halves, I believe centres, and then I think Gus Gould, as we spoke about in the past, has talked about his potential to even play dummy half. So you look at that sort of modern super utility, and he's certainly a player that could profile to it. And on top of that, if we have signed him, it gives you another option at fullback. Not so much for, you know, banking on Isaiah Yongi to struggle, but just in case injury, suspension, or something like that happens, you got another young speedster that can fill in that crucial number one jersey.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's just say, supporters, keep a close eye on that space now, given where we've got to in terms of the reporting of it. And there's one that you pointed out, John, with Rumours, which is Sione Finau from the Dragons.
By way of the Dragons forums and whatnot, it seems to be some mail coming up from their side that Finau could be Parramatta bound. So haven't heard anything on the Para side for that one, boys. But when you get mail that way, it's one of those ones where, like you said, if the reporter's reporting it, you start taking notice. But if it's out there on an opposition forum, it's also an interesting one because sometimes that can have a fair bit of credence too. And we haven't heard it on the Parramatta side, but I think he's a 21, 22-year-old outside back that plays primarily wing, I want to say, but sort of fits that prototypical, outside back mould. I think he's played a couple of NRL games and had, decent efforts there. And in the New South Wales Cup, he averages well in excess of 100 metres a game. So certainly has a bit of production there. So if that is the case, it certainly fits the profile of recruitment that we've seen so far, doesn't it, Sixties? Young, not young as in terms of like 17, 18-year-olds looking for their NRL debut, but young players sort of caught in a logjam, maybe some untapped potential there, have all been productive in New South Wales Cup. Fiending for an opportunity somewhere else. And Finau, if he is to be an Eel, would be a solid acquisition as depth at the very least, and maybe a chance at featuring the backline.
Yeah, now the other one I wanted to touch on, John, is not someone new, but it's being reported out there that Dan Keir has signed on with the Eels again, but this time upgraded to a development contract, which he was on like a second tier type deal this year and got his NRL debut. Now we're pretty confident you can lock in that has happened. Good reward for Dan. He's been with the club for a couple of years now. Very strong pathways through Canberra, real star schoolboy player. Injury struck him when he was moving from age football to open age football. He missed significant periods of time around that, and it was also around the time of COVID. So he's been with the Eels a couple of years now. He's just 100% effort player and versatile. Got his chance this year, and now has been confirmed as remaining with the Eels and upgraded to development list. So congratulations to him, and we wish him well going forward also. What the Eels have definitely confirmed is the extension for Tanika Toddhunter with the NRLW team, extended to the end of 2026. John, that's more good news?
Yeah, Tanika has been a very solid player for the Eels as what was initially the relief dummy half, and then was obviously thrust into a starting role once Ruben got injured. I think, given how young she is and the tools that she's displayed, there's definitely a player that you can develop even further there and turn her into a really what's the word for, like a probing, aggressive interchange dummy half, one that can really test a tiring defense. Good stuff by the club. Tanika's young, she's talented, and off the season that we've just had, you want to be trying to keep the young, talented players, this team together and try and build something, and she certainly fits that profile. So, good stuff on both sides there.
Yeah, now we're going to quickly go through some of the Australians in action, some of the Parramatta players in action this weekend for the respective teams, just to give you a reminder of who to look for. So we've got the Momax factor in action, hashtag Momax, with Lomax and Moses making their Australian debuts against Tonga. So that's the first one. Anything you want to add on that, John?
No, obviously really excited, hoping that neither picks up an injury. As always, it just goes to say with any football, let alone football outside of the blue and gold jersey. But really happy to see both those boys making their Australian debuts. Really keen to see if they can get that connection that we saw in State of Origin cooking in the green and gold jersey. And yeah, I'm just going to be really happy watching this game, knowing that there's a couple of Eels there representing. And really, and for Zach Lomax, who is still very young in his career, it's obviously a milestone game. But for Moses, who's fought for a long time, incredibly hard to build a reputation that was, sullied unfairly by the departure from the West Tigers, I would argue, to the point where he's now won over public opinion purely on the back of his skill and hard work. This is really a watershed moment for him. And obviously that State of Origin series where he was one of the prime figures in an improbable series win was huge. But this really is a culmination for him to don the green and gold. So really happy for Mitch. Hope he has a big game and a chance to solidify himself in the Kangaroo squad for the next few years, potentially.
Yes. Now, and of course, in that same game for Tonga, we have incoming recruit Iongi, who's on their extended roster. So he probably is not going to get a game against Australia by the looks of it, but he is on their list. Moving forward, Sivo's in action. Micah Sivo's in action for Fiji. And then in the women's side of things, in the Australian team, we've got Mahalia Murphy. She's on the interchange bench. And Abby Church is on the extended list. For Tonga, we've got 3 players who will be in action. So we've got Cassie Toihiku, who's been named at half, Jade Fanua, who's been named at dummy half, and Kate Fallon, who's been named in the centres. They're taking on Samoa, and we've got Lindsay Tui at centre and Pahiku Berryman Duff on the bench. So a few players.
Not to forget Elsie Albert captaining the Orchids as well.
Oh, yes. And yes, of course. Elsie with the Orchids. Mate, that just so keep an eye on those players over the early rounds of the Pacific Championships, and we'll give a preview of how we think those games are going to go at the end of this podcast. John, just before we finish off the Parramatta news in this podcast, just a quick comment about the Gutherson situation. We had Dean Ritchie came out with a scathing article towards Parramatta, basically accusing the Eels of disrespect towards Gutherson and rubbishing the club for what's happening around the Eels captain. Do you have any comments that you want to make about that?
We knew it was coming, didn't we? It's just such an easy article to write. And it's going to prey on the emotions of fans that are, understandably very sentimental about Gutherson, who's been such a titanic figure for the Eels. But like I said, this is a very pragmatic process for the club. You've got a new head coach coming in, looking to lead the club in the direction that he wants. You've got an aging captain and fullback who we know is playing on borrowed time. Like anyone that was at the game this year, not on TV, but at the game, and looked at Gutherson in between plays, in between sets, saw a man that was putting his body through rigors that he had no right to in terms of common sense. He was so battered and bruised. So it comes to the point where, do you want to make Gutherson a career Eel and absorb a cost in your salary cap that could be detrimental? Because that is the opportunity cost here. And that's not to say that Gutherson couldn't still be an Eel if he embraces that utility role and the contract reflects that. There is absolutely a place for him at the club, but you cannot be paying him in excess of $900,000. The bloke just hasn't got that left in the tank anymore, and it's just going to put the club in a really awkward position salary cap wise. So, yes, people can be upset at losing a heart and soul player for the team potentially. We're talking in a hypothetical still here, but like I said, this is a very pragmatic decision by the club, and I'm not going to begrudge people being upset by it. As much as the media standing there trying to fan the flames. If Gutherson does depart the Parramatta Eels, I don't think it's a bad call by the club, at least when you're talking about the pragmatic side of it. Emotionally, it's going to be sad for everyone. Gutherson's been huge for the Parramatta Eels for nearly a decade now. But yeah, I'm not surprised that Richie and company were on board for fanning the flames in this one. Easy article to write.
Yeah, and just a couple of things I want to say about Gutho. I think readers of TCT and people who've listened to the podcast know the regard in which I hold Clint Gutherson, and I've got him right up there as
we often have to caution ourselves against giving votes in the 3-2-1 because that's how consistent and such a great servant of the club he's been. It's not like we're here saying we need to get rid of Quinton Gutherson. He is no good. We're saying that the club is approaching a difficult decision, thinking about all the options here, both short-term and long-term, and what's best for the long-term health of the club. It's a difficult decision. There's going to be some pain in this call.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, I've waxed lyrical about Gutho. I've raved about. I've almost been dumbfounded just how the levels he finds on the training track, the inspiration he provides for his teammates, what he produces on the field, the way he's fought injuries this year to be consistently one of the best players on the field. Has he got something left for the Eels? Yes, going forward, yes, he has. And the ideal situation in my mind is that he's there next year as part of the team, and then the club sees, what sort of role he plays going forward. That doesn't suit him or his management, unfortunately, and it's understandable. It's absolutely understandable. The Eels can't guarantee him a contract past next year. It seems like another club might be able to do that and might be able to pay him money that's closer to what he's on right now. But as John just said, you can't expect the club to pay future money. We're not talking about his current contract. We're talking about a future contract, meaning from 2026 onwards. The club can't pay money on sentiment. If you paid Gutho based on everything that he's done up to now, he's worth every cent of the 900,000 that he's on. He has been that good. To me, he's in terms of toughness right up there with Ray Price, and I don't back away from that. I think I've gone on record as saying I think they should name an award at the Ken Thornett Medal in his honour. It may not happen now because he's not going to finish. It looks like he's not going to finish with the club. But in an ideal world, he finishes with the club. In a realistic world where he gets what he's after and you're not paying on sentiment, it looks like he's going. I don't think the club can be accused of pushing him out or disrespect. I think it's the business side of football coming out in both parties.
Yeah, exactly. And the club are copying it from the press. But, we're seeing there was a brunch meeting that was leaked the day of that, came in a way to benefit the Gutherson side negotiations. Like, that's both sides playing the game there. As much as the club's getting ragged on by Dean Ritchie for how they treated Gutherson, his manager, Sam Ayub, would be ruthless when it comes to pressing any advantage he can to maximise the gains for himself and his client. So that's how things are in the NRL right now. We're not counting our chickens before they hatch here. Gutherson may still be a Parramatta Eel moving forwards, but
that's the ideal thing for mine for next year, because he's still got something to offer the club, but if you want to be absolutely ruthless, you go, well, if another club takes Gutherson, it's basically that he goes a year earlier than the club might have been expecting, and then the club gets some salary cap benefit immediately. So that's the ruthless stance. But
I just think mentally and emotionally, it's better to not reconcile yourself that he's leaving, but understand that there is a possibility that he could leave. Because that's how things work in the NRL. You sign a player for the year after, but if it's a player of primary need, the club will then push for an early release. And he's been linked heavily to the Dragons. They've got a huge issue at fullback right now. They don't have an established guy that they trust. Obviously, they've got the speedster there in, I always forget his name.
Tyrell Sloan,
who seems to not work for Flanagan because he was there. They dropped him to reserve grade. And the only way he came back in was via injury. So they've got a clear need at fullback. So if they come knocking after signing that initial deal, you would expect them to then push for an early release. And whether the Eels give away, who knows? We've stood our ground under Brad Arthur in the past. Riles might see this, like you said, as an opportunity to open up cap space. Who knows? So I feel like fans should be understanding that this is a legitimate opportunity, a legitimate chance that it could happen. Like I'm not saying it is happening, but now that his management have pushed for an not early release, but early negotiations ahead of a November 1 deadline, it is a possible follow-up outcome. So a lot of stuff to play out because then if that hypothetical takes place, what do the Eels do with the cap space? There are some players still in the market that you could go and sign. And we know that literally flipping that situation on its head, that if the Eels lose Gufferson who's under contract, there's not much stopping them pursuing someone who is under contract elsewhere. But yeah, this I hope moving forwards, whichever way it plays out, that both sides you could just keep it clean because I would hate to see Gufferson's legacy at the Eels get tarnished by an ugly split if it does go down that path because he deserves so much better than that. Like you said, he is a player of stature that could seriously be considered naming a Ken Fournette Medal Night Award after. So however it plays out, hopefully he stays in Eel and kills it as a utility, which seems to be the mandate under new coach Riles, or if he parts ways, it just stays clean.
Well said, mate, and I think we might leave it there, and we're about to throw to your musical interlude. Now, I must say to people, when we're looking at the podcast, John and I have a run sheet that we go through, so we are both aware of exactly what we're going to be talking about during the podcast. But the one thing that John doesn't let me in on is what he has in store in his musical interludes, so that when you are listening to this, realise that when it was recorded, I'm listening to it without any notion of what John's got in store. So without further ado, John, over to you.
Yeah, the Aurora Australis has been popping off lately. And while I don't have any music that pertains directly to the Southern Lights, there is a very famous Simpsons episode that references the Northern Lights, which, of course, is the Aurora Borealis. And we've used this artist on the podcast in the past, and it was the rather iconic Tropic Thunder remix or sound remix that we had. And he's got a little take on the Simpsons, the artist, of course, being Yuri Wong. So check him out on YouTube if you want to have a listen to all the other tracks here. But this is his remix of the Simpsons episode featuring the Aurora Borealis.
Mate, you've again outdone yourself. And can I just say I happen to know someone who made a middle-of-the-night trip down around, I don't know, somewhere deep down in the southern suburbs to see the Aurora Australis. And it just so happened that it was on a night where it was raining and the trip was still made. And guess what was seen?
I was going to say, I hope it wasn't clouds. Oh, no.
Because the forecast was supposed to be that cloud disappearing, clearing, so you'd be able to see it. And no, it didn't happen for that person concerned. And the trip at around 1 or 2 a.m. whatever it was a little bit of a waste of time, but I guess it occupied that person's early hours of the morning on that day. So anyway, mate, we've got, let's start off with some NRL roster / contract news that's going around. First of all, it might yet relate to Clint Gutherson, but Ben Hunt is free to negotiate. I say that, that question
the upward inflection.
Yes,
yep. It's we've gotten conflicting reports in the last 24 hours, haven't we? 60s that Hunt has been allowed to approach other clubs in terms of sourcing a contract for the future. But by the same token, we've seen a conflicting report that the Saints won't consider releasing him under any grounds for next year. So it would be for a 2026 contract and onwards. And much like the Gutherson situation, he's just been given a fortnight in advance to negotiate. So bizarre situation. Whenever I hear something like that, 60s, I always think that the club is just trying to strong arm position where they're sending a message to other clubs that we're not going to give them away for free. You're going to have to throw in a sweetener, which, as always, the team that is controlling the current contract, you understand where they're coming from. But, yeah, it's just funny to see the conflicting messages come out. Look, Ben Hunt doesn't want to be a drag. I think that's pretty clear, isn't it? This contract saga has been playing out for damn near 2 years now. He's been pushing for a release for that entire period. Still played some solid football this year under Flanagan in spite of that conflict. But, you know, he's on the back nine of his career now. And the difficulty when it comes to Ben Hunt is that I think he still sees himself as a halfback, whereas a lot of his best football has been played at dummy half. And the future employer would be wanting him in one role, maybe not the other, whereas he might be the inverse. So, I don't know. He'll probably end up at one of the Southeast Queensland clubs, whether it's maybe the Dolphins or the Titans, although the Titans just spent big on Reg, so I'm not sure what their cap situation is, but they were the favourite this year, weren't they, 60s? Alongside maybe, there was a little cheeky rumour, sort of origin period, that the Broncos made some inquiries about him as a dummy half. So, a few Queensland clubs in play. I mean, the Roosters are looking for a half right now, aren't they? Or maybe two halves. Sam Walker's injured and they've got another halfback in trouble, which we'll speak about shortly. So who knows? But just funny seeing those conflicting reports come out so quickly.
Yeah, and I know there were some Parramatta supporters who were suggesting, is it possible to do a swap and what have you? I don't think that's on Jason Ryle's radar at all, although where it might influence what happens around Gutho, they all might be part of the dominoes for
a 3 or 4 party, interplay at some point,
yeah, and we've seen it happen before. Or there was a dominoes that fell in different directions way back when Michael Jennings became an Eel,
and then there was someone else involved as well. Yeah, so not the first time it's happened.
No. Other market news. Ronaldo Mulatalo is apparently wants to test out the market, what offers might come his way. The Eels, of course, had his twin brother, Lorenzo Mulatalo, make their, fraternal twin, make his debut for the Eels this year. Lorenzo won't be with the Eels next year. I think there are people who are suggesting that should Mike Acevo move to Super League, that he might be a good option for the Eels to recruit. I don't know if how things stand on the money front with what Parramatta might be prepared to play someone like Ronaldo. I would guess that Ronaldo's been on an amount which has been beneficial for the Sharks up till now, and he probably sees that his worth is beyond that. So,
and he's reality is he's one of the top wingers in the game. He's got a cheeky little error when he scores a try every now and then. And if I was a coach, I'd be flaming him for the pre-try celebration that he loves. But he's a hell of a player. 24 years old, I want to say, thereabouts. Let me just quickly have a gander at that because he's the same age as Dylan, I'm pretty certain. Ronaldo Mulatalo is 24 and he's turning 25 in November. So this is like his prime contract, isn't it? This is like him coming into the full realization of his powers as an NRL player, and he's going to want top dollar for it. I mean, if you're the Eels, you're doing due diligence, aren't you? You're going to kick the tires on that and have a poke around and see what's there. But he's the sort of player that commands a very strong market, so you're not going to get him cheap.
Yes. Now, we're going to just quickly mention that there's a couple of rumours floating around. We're not going to dive into the ins and outs of it, but there's rumours floating around about Selwyn Cobbo looking for a shift from the Broncos, and about Adam Dwahi, and I think the rumours were linking him with the Dragons. Is that right? So we're not going to dive into that because they're just sort of like just starting to float around now, and there may not be too much meat in those rumours. Yeah. So now there is a little bit of unfortunate news around, John, concerning the Roosters' Sandon Smith.
Yeah, coming out today. Sort of struggled to read this one initially because it was a lot of acronyms, but via Twitter and obviously the news posts like Daily Telegraph, Roosters halfback Sandon Smith has been charged with negligent driving causing grievous bodily harm. So pretty serious charge initially, but going into the Reddit thread on this, there's, I believe, a commenter who was a case of I know someone who knows someone. I think it's Hopperlap was the commenter there, so shout out to the Manly fan there, who stated the injury is pretty gnarly, and I believe that it's resulted in a lost foot for the poor innocent party here. Someone was trying to get into their car or putting someone into a car and was crushed during the impact of the collision. So that's...
Allegedly.
Allegedly. And if that's the case, that's just horrific. I mean, someone's life has just completely changed in a blink of an eye. And, you know, you can joke and... Not joke, but, you know, if you're going to lose a limb or an extremity, a foot's, you know, one of the better things to do, but that didn't need to lose this limb. So just awful for the poor party involved there. Going to be very interesting to see how the NRL handles this 60s. No inclination of a DUI here. I don't see any reference to driving under the influence anywhere, but a serious, you know, life-changing injury has occurred as a result of the action. So where does the punishment land here?
Yeah, it will be an interesting one to follow. My thinking is that it'll just play out to whatever the court decisions are. I think that's...
it should be subject to a no-fault stand-down, by the by, because I looked at a chart for the negligent driving resulting in the grievous bodily harm, and I think the maximum sentence is... that's just the driving stuff there. So I don't know if there's a requisite... Was it 11 years for non-domestic violence-related issues? Was the no-fault stand-down? So, I mean, that looking at at least the license charges here, it's incredibly benign for what can be a pretty serious outcome, as we saw in the case here. So, have to wait and see, but, you know, just hope that the poor party involved can, you know, not be impacted in their employment and not, you know, their personal life. You know, if they're a sporty person, that's a huge change in what they can and can't do now.
Oh, look, it's a huge life change anyway. So we just send our thoughts and best wishes to the person who has been injured. John, now let's just quickly do a run through of the matches for this week's Pacific Championships and give our tips.
Yeah, as we record on a Thursday night, tomorrow night, Friday, which is when you're probably going to be listening to this podcast, you've got the Kangaroos hosting the Tonga 13. This one kicks off at 8:10 p.m. Suncorp Stadium is the venue. Can watch it across 9 Now, KO and Foxtel, so all your major digital channels and television channels there. For the Kangaroos, they line up with Edwards at fullback. You've got Coates and Lomax on the wings. The Hammer and Tommy T are in the centres. Tom Dearden will partner Mitchell Moses, which was our predicted halves combination back when the squad was announced, wasn't it, 60s?
Yeah.
Pat Carrigan at prop forward, Lindsay Collins the other bookend in the front row. Harry Grant will start at number 9. Back row sees Crichton, Cam Murray and Isaiah Yeo as the three starting back rowers there. Yeo will have the C next to his name. Big honour for a player that had a great season. Then you got on the interchange, Matty Burton as a utility, interesting there. Mitch Barnett, Ruben Cotter and Hudson Young. So a bit of a smaller, more mobile interchange there from the Roos. Be interesting to see how that handles up against the Tongans, who look like this. At fullback, One of the breakout players this year, Lehigh Hopoate, played wing for Manly, but will play fullback for Tonga. Then you got Danny Tupou and Sione Katoa on the flanks, Moses Sui and Paul Alamotti in the centres. Halves see Tui Lolahia and Isaiah Katoa partnering. Be really cool to see Katoa taking a step forwards here in the international level, because that's really what Tonga need, isn't it, 60s? Having a dynamic playmaker to push them that one step forwards. Adam Fanua-Blake captains the team in the front row. He partners Felice Kafusi at prop. Saliva Havili, the dummy half. You got Homole Okawatu, Elias Katoa, and Jason Tamalolo was a pretty good-looking back row. On the interchange, Tony Lucas, the dummy half utility. Satili Tupanua, Taniela Paseka, and Keon Kolo-Matongi round out a diametrically opposed bench that is very big and very powerful, full of three very talented forwards there. Interesting to see how the two teams sort of got the opposed strategies there on the interchange. I mean, Hudson Young and Mitch Barnett are not small, but they aren't the power forwards that Paseka and Kolo-Matongi are. So, going to be interesting to see how the rotations work for both those squads.
Yeah, mate. I still look at the Tongan side and I go, you know what? They're probably capable of matching the the Australian team in a lot of respects, with the exception probably around the halves. And so I think Australia gets the job done because they're going to have better playmakers, and I think they probably get the job done by about 12 to 18 points difference.
Isaiah Katoa looked like he'd taken some very legitimate steps forwards for a good stretches this year. I think he probably finished the season a little bit quieter, but not bad by any means. Although he was sort of lost in that weird logjam of replacements that Wayne Bennett made that worked one week and didn't work the other. So I think if Tonga as a team are going to take a big step forwards, and they've beaten Australia, it's not like they're incapable of doing it, but if they're going to be consistently button heads of the big boys, they need someone like Isaiah Katoa to solidify into a bona fide star. So I'm hoping that he can make those, not do it all right now, but make more strides on that path in this game.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. John, if we go through the Australian team for the women's and their opponent, and then I think with the other games, we might, rather than go through all the team lists, we might just give our opinions on what will happen in the game.
Yeah, so for the Gillaroos, they kick off 6:05 p.m, same venue, so obviously the first game on the slate. Outstanding fullback Tamika Upton in the number one there. Julia Robinson, Jakia Whitfield on the flanks, Isabel Kelly and Tiana Penatani in the centres. Ali Brigginshaw will captain the team with a 6 on her back, and she partners the outstanding Taryn Aiken in the halves. Front row, Millie Elliott and Shannon Mato. Quincy Dodd as a dummy half. Kezi Apps, Yasmin Clydesdale on the edges. Samima Taufa at lock forward. Olivia Higgins, Sarah Togatuki, Keely Joseph and Parramatta's own Mahalia Murphy on the interchange. And then for the Orchids, the notable names here, obviously Parramatta's Elsie Albert in number 10 captaining the team, because otherwise it looks like it's a lot of local talent here. I'm just trying to see if there's any recognisable NRLW names, and I don't think so. You've got Marla Mark, Freda Walu, Belinda Guasman, Norris and Allen in the back line, Karoy and Jose in the halves, Banu Ravu and Albert in the front row, Muka, Vivas and Kalpa in the back row, Kapo Reeves, Kunjil and Karoa as part of their interchange. So looks like a lot of local talent there for Fiji, which is certainly not a bad thing. We've been talking about the importance of developing...
For PNG.
Sorry, for PNG. We're talking about the importance of developing their playing stocks, and it looks like they've got a team that's got a lot of local talent here.
Yeah, John, a lot of local talent, but when you're talking about the strength of the Australian NRLW team, you're talking about the cream of what's becoming such a strong and elite competition with the NRLW. We spoke last week about the flack that I copped when I suggested there was a gulf in standard between what was played in the NRLW competition and what the AFLW competition was dishing out. But they are dealing with a competition where the talent is spread so thin because they've got so many teams and so many players are required for each team. And the NRLW it started as a very focused competition that you had the 4 teams to make sure the talent was always there. They've expanded to 10 teams. At the same time, that talent pool has grown. And what you have now in this Australian team is really pretty much the best of the best all concentrated together to the extent where you're looking at players who missed out on the team and you go, how does someone so talented miss out on the team? And, of course, we're talking about the likes of Jamie Chapman. We're talking about the likes of
Olivia Koenig.
A name just wasn't quite coming to mind, which sounds ridiculous when I'm talking about someone that shouldn't be missed out. But, yeah, to win the Dally M Player of the Year and be such a standout player and excel in representative football as well, but then not make the Australian team, it's a little bit dumbfounding as far as I'm concerned. But that only goes towards talking about the strength of the Australian NRLW team. They will win this, John. They will win this. It might not be good for international football, but they are surely going to win this by some margin, and I'm talking about at least 50 points. I think the market's giving them a line at 62.5, something like that. No, that might be the. Is that the men's game or the women's game? No, I think that's a women's game where it's that huge line. So I think it's going to fit in with what the betting odds are. Yourself?
Yeah, look, you'd love to see a competitive affair, but the Australian Prime Minister's team were able to comprehensively beat the PNG team last week, and this is a much better team for the Australian side. And I know that it's a better PNG team too, but there's a significant step up in talent across the park. This is going to be, and the other thing too is that it's being played in Australian conditions now, and those conditions up in Port Moresby were hot and humid and testing, and I think played a part on both sides of the ball. This is going to be played under classic Queensland rugby conditions, and I think that they're going to be, by a long stretch, the better team.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so very quickly, the rest of the matches.
Yeah, on Saturday, 7:10 p.m. out at HFC Bank Stadium in Suva, so over in Fiji. You got the Fiji Bati hosting the PNG Kummels. We mentioned Mike Acevo, but other notables quickly, Taruva. You got, there's some, Michael Jennings, Wonga Blake, Semi Valamay, Kevin Aguama, Tui Kamakamifa. Viliami Kikau's a big one there, so some good players there for the Fijian team. And then for the Kummels, you've got Nene McDonald, Kyle Labour, Lockie Lamb, Reece Martin, so Jack DeBellin as well. So less star power in the Kummels team, but we haven't seen that inhibit them in the past in these sort of matchups where I think they've gotten the better of Fiji more recently.
Yeah, it's almost like the commitment and the desire for that PNG team drives them whenever they're taking the field. Oh, it doesn't matter who the opposition is. And if it's an opponent who's maybe not quite got that same look, it's tough to talk about passion and commitment and to say a team doesn't have the same as anyone else, but it really seems like PNG take that to another level when they're on the field and they surprise people with it. Look, I think if both teams play to their potential, Fiji gets it. So, I'll go with Fiji this time, but not with a certainty.
Look,
not with a certainty.
Fiji at home, I think, is a fair benefit for them, a fair advantage. But I tipped Fiji in this corresponding match last year, I believe, and the Kummels came out and just annihilated them.
Yes.
I think there's a bit of momentum coming out of PNG now. I'm going to back the PNG boys, and it's going to be a tough game, I think, over there. But I think I'll go with PNG as the victors.
Okay, and look, and maybe they've got the advantage in the halves. So, we'll see.
And then the other game that was being played at the same venue, 5 o'clock p.m. HFC Bank Stadium, Suva, is the Tonga 13 versus the Fetu Samoa. So this is the women's game. And we obviously have a few Eels in play here. On the Samoan side, in the centres, Kate Fallon. In the halves, Cassie Toihiku with the important number 7 on her back. And then Jade Whenua at dummy half. And then on the flip side, Lindsay Tui is in the centres for Samoa. And then Pahuka Berryman Duff is on the interchange there, being the utility role. So more than a couple of Eels involved there. There's plenty of Eels across both sides, so it's going to be fun to watch this one. I do not know who has the advantage here, Sixties. If anything, I'm going to lean towards Tonga purely because Cassie Toihiku has that X factor about her. And her in the halves with the number 7 means she's going to be the primary ball player, or you'd think she's the primary ball player. And I think that can be really problematic for Samoa.
Yeah, and it all these international games, it keeps coming down to what's happening in the halves. And I like you, it's maybe a tough one to call, but I lean towards Tonga for the exact same reason as you.
And I think that's week 1, the previews at least, not the actual results in the books. And the other thing too, I suppose, is that no Samoa in the Pacific Championships this year because they're touring England. And that means that I think Jake Tungor is our lone representative for Samoa this year because Junior is recovering from injury. So we'll have to wait and see how they go about naming their teams. But really looking forward to this first slate of games, 60s. Going to be fun to watch, hoping for as many competitive results as possible. But yeah, mostly beyond that, hoping that our boys in Lomax and Moses primarily, obviously want everyone to stay injury-free, but for the stakes in the NRL, I hope that those two boys pull through unscathed.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, I think we're at the end of this podcast. So thank you to everyone for listening. Shout out again to our sponsors, Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. Reminder to everyone, if you're a Parramatta Leagues Club member, keep yourself informed about what's going on at the moment. And when you get the voting papers and the voting is open, which I think might be around the 22nd of this month. I might have to double check that, but please make sure that you vote. Electronic voting is very, very easy. Vote against the resolutions. That's our recommendation. Of course, vote however you want, but our recommendation is to vote against the resolutions. And apart from that, mate, as I always say, go you mighty Eels.